The first thing I learned after dying from exhaustion was that the afterlife had terrible timing. 1 second, I was face down on my keyboard in a cramped apartment in Chicago, surrounded by cold coffee, overdue emails, and a fantasy novel I had promised myself I would finish after one more assignment. The next, I opened my eyes to thunder-shaking stained glass windows and a room so enormous my old studio could have fit inside it 6 times. Gold candles flickered along marble walls. Rain streaked the windows in silver lines. My knees ached against the cold floor, and I was wearing enough embroidered fabric to qualify as a decorative couch. Across from me stood a man in a black formal coat, a thin gold crown resting over neatly combed dark hair. He was tall, pale, and composed in the way only extremely powerful people and expensive mannequins ever managed. His blue eyes settled on me with unmistakable dislike. "Do not touch me," he said. His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. I looked past him at the giant bed covered in dark blue blankets. Then I looked back at him. "Great," I said. "Can I sleep on the other side?" Silence. Real, heavy, cathedral-level silence. Somewhere near the door, a servant made a tiny choking sound. The king stared at me as if I had just asked to borrow his crown for a grocery run. Before he could answer, pain flashed behind my eyes, and memories that were not mine poured into my head. A royal wedding, endless arguments, desperate letters, public humiliation, a husband named Ethan Carter who had spent years trying to win the affection of King Adrian Cross and failing with remarkable consistency. I knew those names. I knew this palace. I knew the story. My gaze drifted toward the leather-bound novel lying open on a nearby table, its title stamped in gold. The Tyrant King's Unwanted Consort. Of course, I had not gone to heaven. I had gone into the book I had been reading when I died. Worse, I had become the most disliked character in it. Ethan Carter, the king's husband, was vain, jealous, dramatic, and doomed to lose everything after being blamed for a scandal he did not create. According to the original plot, his downfall began in 7 days at a royal banquet, with a silver goblet of poisoned wine placed beside the king's hand. I swallowed. Adrian's expression sharpened. "What game are you playing now?" "No game," I said, because I was too tired to invent one. I pushed myself up, nearly tripped over the ceremonial robe, and pointed toward the bed. "I have had the longest day of my life, followed immediately by the strangest day of my afterlife. We can discuss our unhappy marriage, your obvious trust issues, and my apparently terrible reputation tomorrow." The servants stared. Adrian stared. Even the rain seemed to pause. I climbed onto the far side of the bed, pulled the blanket over myself, and closed my eyes. Behind me, the king spoke in a low, incredulous voice. "You expect me to believe you are simply tired?" "Your Majesty," I murmured, already half asleep. "Being suspicious sounds exhausting. You should try resting." He said nothing after that. But just before sleep took me, one thought returned with perfect clarity. 7 days. 1 banquet. 1 poison cup. And if I wanted to survive this story, I had less than a week to change the ending. When I woke, sunlight was pouring through the tall windows, and King Adrian Cross was gone. That was encouraging. Less encouraging was the line of servants standing beside the bed as if they had been waiting to confirm whether I was alive. I sat up slowly, still tangled in embroidered blankets, and the oldest servant stepped forward. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his expression carefully blank. "Your Grace, His Majesty has requested your presence at breakfast." "Please tell His Majesty that I am deeply honored," I said, rubbing my eyes. "But I am currently committed to not being conscious." No one laughed. Tough room. Within an hour, I learned 3 things. First, royal clothing had more buttons than any reasonable society should permit. Second, the former Ethan Carter owned enough jewelry to fund a small town. Third, everyone in the palace expected me to begin begging Adrian for forgiveness the moment I could stand upright. Instead, I asked for paper. I wrote 3 short orders. Return every unopened gift from the king. Cancel every private dinner request. Move me to the abandoned West residence at the edge of the palace grounds. The silver-haired servant read the page twice. "Your Grace, the West residence has not been occupied in years." Perfect. It sounds quiet. By noon, the entire palace knew. I could feel the rumors moving faster than the servants carrying my trunks. Some thought I was planning revenge. Others believed I had lost my mind. One maid whispered that I was preparing to disappear. She was closest to the truth. I wanted distance from Adrian, distance from the banquet, and distance from every terrible decision the original Ethan had made. The West residence was dusty, cold, and surrounded by an overgrown garden, but it had windows, bookshelves, and a bed without a king standing beside it. I called that progress. While the servants unpacked, I found a small boy sitting near the hallway wall, trying very hard not to cough. His name was Oliver Finch, and he could not have been older than 16. He insisted he was fine, which was exactly what people said when they were obviously not fine. I touched the back of my hand to his forehead. He was burning with fever. "Why are you working?" I asked. Oliver lowered his eyes. "The household physician only treats senior staff, Your Grace." Of course he did. Apparently cruelty also had an organizational chart. I ordered medicine, warm soup, and clean blankets. When the steward protested about the cost, I removed a ruby bracelet from my wrist and placed it in his palm. "Sell this." He looked horrified. That was a wedding gift from His Majesty. Then it is finally doing something useful. It was getting in the way. Adrian stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. Of what? I pulled the blanket higher over Oliver's shoulders. Of remembering that this marriage was never mine. For the first time since I arrived in this world, the king did not look angry. He looked uncertain, and somehow, that was much more dangerous. Adrian remained by the door long enough for the silence to become uncomfortable, which was impressive considering I had once attended a 3-hour corporate meeting about the color of a logo. His eyes stayed on the wedding ring beside Oliver's medicine. "You speak as though you are a stranger to your own life," he said. "Lately, I feel like one." That answer did not satisfy him, but Oliver shifted beneath the blankets, and Adrian's attention moved toward the bed. The hardness in his expression changed by a fraction. "Will he recover?" "The physician says he needs rest, warm food, and several days away from work." I folded the damp cloth and placed it on the table. Apparently those are rare luxuries around here. Adrian glanced at me. "Is that an accusation?" "It is an observation. Accusations require more energy." His mouth tightened, although I could not tell whether he was annoyed or trying not to react. He stepped closer, bringing the quiet scent of rain and cedar into the room. "You sold a royal gift, abandoned your chambers, dismissed half your attendants, and removed your ring. My advisors believe you are planning something. Your advisors need hobbies. And what do you believe?" I looked at Oliver's sleeping face. "I believe a sick boy should not have to earn medicine." Adrian said nothing. When I finally looked up, his gaze was fixed on my wrist, where my sleeve had slipped back. Thin pale marks crossed the skin, old enough to have faded but not disappeared. Memories stirred at the edge of my mind. A locked room, a trembling hand, someone saying that loyalty always required payment. I pulled the sleeve down quickly. Adrian noticed. Of course he noticed. Kings probably took classes in noticing things other people wanted hidden. "Who did that?" he asked. His voice had gone very still. "I do not know." "You expect me to believe you cannot remember?" "I expect nothing from you." The words came out sharper than I intended. Adrian looked almost offended, but beneath that was something stranger. Concern. It did not belong on his face. Not when he looked at me. I stood, suddenly desperate for air, and walked into the abandoned greenhouse behind the West residence. Moonlight spilled through dusty glass. Vines climbed broken stone planters, and the night smelled of wet soil and sleeping roses. I sat on an old bench with a blanket around my shoulders and opened the novel's memories again, searching for anything about the scars. Nothing came clearly. Only fear. Only the sense that the original Ethan had been carrying a secret too heavy to share. At some point, exhaustion won. When I woke, Adrian's dark coat was draped over me. He stood several feet away, examining a burned piece of paper he had found beneath the bench. "What is that?" I asked. He handed it to me. Most of the writing had been destroyed, but one sentence remained. "If Adrian learns the truth, he will be the next one to die." Beneath the words was a black wax seal stamped with the crest of Marcus Hale, the royal chancellor. Adrian's face turned unreadable. Mine probably did the same. The banquet was 4 days away, and the man trusted with protecting the kingdom had just become the most dangerous person in it. For days later, I discovered that royal banquets were mostly elegant ways to trap people in uncomfortable clothing while they lied to one another over expensive food. The great hall glittered beneath hundreds of candles, every silver plate polished bright enough to reflect my anxiety. Adrian sat beside me at the center table, calm and unreadable in formal black and gold. Chancellor Marcus Hale stood several seats away, smiling like a man who had never misplaced anything more important than a pen. I kept seeing his black wax seal in my mind. If Adrian learns the truth, he will be next. You have been staring at Marcus for 6 minutes, Adrian murmured without turning his head. I am admiring his complete lack of suspicious behavior. That sentence does not mean what you think it means. It means I would like to leave. Denied. I sighed. Marriage truly is a sacred prison. The corner of Adrian's mouth moved, almost becoming a smile before he remembered he was supposed to distrust me. Musicians played near the tall windows while servants carried in the final course. Then I saw it. A silver goblet with a tiny blue stone set into its stem, placed beside Adrian's right hand exactly as I remembered from the novel. My heartbeat stumbled. The original story had been vague about who arranged the poisoned wine, but it had been painfully clear about the result. Ethan would be blamed. Adrian would survive. The kingdom would begin tearing itself apart. A servant reached for the bottle. I moved before I had time to think. Your Majesty, I said loudly, lifting the goblet. I believe this one is mine. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Across the table, Marcus stopped smiling. That was enough for me. I let the goblet slip from my fingers. It struck the tablecloth, sending dark red wine across the white fabric. Gasps spread through the hall. I stood so quickly my chair tipped backward. How unfortunate, I said. I have always been clumsy around treason. The room became silent. Adrian rose beside me. His hand closed gently around my wrist, steadying me. Explain. Not here. Marcus stepped forward, still composed. Your Grace appears unwell. Perhaps the strain of the evening has confused him. I am confused often, I said, but not about you. Before anyone could respond, the room tilted. Heat rushed beneath my skin, followed by a deep, familiar weakness that did not belong to me. The banquet lights blurred into golden circles. Adrian caught me before I reached the floor. His voice sounded close and distant at the same time as he ordered everyone back and called for the royal physician. I woke later in a quiet chamber with Adrian sitting beside the bed, his coat discarded and his sleeves rolled to his forearms. The physician stood near the window, looking troubled. The wine was contaminated, he said, but His Grace did not drink it. Adrian's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Then why did he collapse? The physician looked at me with something close to pity. Because the same substance has been accumulating in his body for years. The room went completely still. Adrian turned toward me, all suspicion gone from his face. In its place was horror. Years, he whispered. The physician nodded. Someone has been poisoning your husband slowly, Your Majesty. The physician ordered 3 days of complete rest, which sounded wonderful until I realized complete rest apparently included being watched by a king who had forgotten how to blink. Adrian remained beside the bed long after everyone else left. The chamber was quiet except for rain tapping the windows and the low crackle of the fireplace. I opened my eyes sometime after midnight and found him sitting in the same chair, one hand resting near mine on the blanket. You are still here, I murmured. So are you. That is less surprising. I am the patient. His gaze moved over my face as if he were searching for an answer written somewhere beneath my skin. The physician says the poison has been in your body for years. He mentioned that. And you remember nothing? I looked toward the ceiling. The truth was that I remembered pieces. A bitter drink swallowed in secret. A locked cabinet. A voice warning me not to ask questions. None of the memories were complete, and none belonged entirely to me. Only fragments, I said. Adrian leaned forward. The candlelight softened the hard lines of his face. For the first time, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had discovered he had been wrong about something important. I thought you were manipulating me, he said. You usually do. I am serious. That is what makes this uncomfortable. His fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the mattress. Why did you stop the wine? I could not tell him that I had read his future in a novel while eating cold takeout in another world. Because Marcus looked pleased. That is your explanation? I have worked in offices. Never trust a man who smiles during a crisis. Adrian almost laughed. The sound never fully escaped, but I saw it in the brief warmth around his eyes. Then the warmth disappeared. You could have been accused again. I was going to be accused anyway. He went still. Again. A memory rose without warning. The original Ethan standing in a candlelit hallway, listening as Marcus spoke behind a closed door. A plan. A cup. Adrian's name. Then another image. Ethan exchanging 2 small glass bottles and swallowing from one before anyone could stop him. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Adrian stood immediately. What is it? I remember something. His palms settled lightly around my wrist, steady and careful. Tell me. The memory sharpened. The bitterness. The fear. A desperate thought that felt like an echo inside my chest. Better me than him. I stared at Adrian. The poison was not meant for Ethan. His expression changed. What do you mean? I think he found out someone was trying to poison you. My voice sounded distant even to me. I think he switched the medicine. Adrian's hand loosened around my wrist, but he did not pull away. Then he knew. Yes. And he said nothing. Maybe he thought no one would believe him. Silence stretched between us. Adrian lowered his head, and for one terrible second, he looked ashamed. I would not have believed him, he said. I did not answer. There was nothing kind enough to say. He stayed beside me until dawn, adjusting the blanket whenever I shifted, bringing water before I asked, and pretending not to notice when I woke from dreams I could not explain. Just before sunrise, I opened my eyes and found him asleep with his head resting near my hand. His fingers were still curved around my wrist, not holding me prisoner, only making sure I was there. And for the first time since entering this world, I wondered whether surviving the story might require more than avoiding the ending. I might have to understand the man beside me, and the husband he had never truly known. By the 3rd morning, I was allowed out of bed, although Adrian treated that permission as a personal insult. He assigned Lucas Reed to follow me through the palace, which Lucas described as royal protection and I described as extremely formal babysitting. Together, we searched the old household records while Adrian attended council. Dust covered the shelves in the archive room, and every ledger smelled like paper, ink, and secrets nobody had wanted examined. The former you requested medicine from the royal pharmacy every month, Lucas said, tracing a column with one careful finger. Not for himself. The orders were filed under the king's private account. So Ethan knew something was wrong long before the banquet. Lucas looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You keep speaking about yourself as though he were another person. I pretended to be fascinated by a tax report. Recovering from poison creates unusual grammar. He did not believe me, but royal secretaries apparently knew when silence was more useful than questions. Near the back of a locked cabinet, we found a thin journal wrapped in faded blue cloth. Several pages had been removed, but the remaining entries were written in Ethan's hand. He had noticed changes in Adrian's medicine years earlier. He had tried to warn the palace physician, only to be dismissed as jealous and unstable. When he confronted Marcus, the chancellor threatened to accuse him of plotting against the crown. Ethan had responded by switching the medicine himself. Month after month, he had taken the dangerous doses and replaced Adrian's with harmless ones. I sat very still. The original Ethan had not been clinging to the king because he wanted attention. He had been staying close enough to monitor every meal, every bottle, every servant who entered Adrian's rooms. His worst behavior had been a disguise, and everyone had believed it, including Adrian. A final loose page slipped from the journal and landed at my feet. The writing was shakier than the rest. If someone else ever wakes in my place, I hope he will do what I could not. Save Adrian. Then leave before loving him becomes another kind of prison. My hands went cold. Lucas read the line over my shoulder, then slowly stepped back. Your Grace, he whispered, who are you? Before I could answer, the archive door opened. Adrian stood there, pale and silent. He had heard enough. Lucas bowed and left without being asked. Adrian crossed the room, took the journal from my unsteady hands, and read the final entry twice. He protected me, he said. His voice was barely more than breath. Yes, and I despised him for it. I wanted to comfort him, but the grief in his face belonged to a history I had not lived. You were deceived. I chose to believe the worst. He lowered himself to one knee before my chair. A king kneeling should have looked powerful. Adrian only looked human. You are not him, he said. It was not a question. I swallowed. No, his eyes closed for a moment. When they opened again, there was sorrow in them, but no anger. Then tell me what you need. I need you to stand up. After that, I looked at the journal between us, at the last wish of a man who had given me his unfinished life. I need the truth about Marcus. I need the freedom to leave when this is over. And I need you to stop treating care like a debt. Adrian nodded slowly. Then he asked the one question I was not prepared to hear. What must I do to make you want to stay? For several seconds, I forgot how words worked. Adrian was still kneeling before me, waiting with the patience of a man who had commanded armies but had no idea how to ask someone not to leave. You cannot make me want anything, I said at last. That is not how this works. His expression tightened, but he nodded. Then I will stop trying to make it work. I expected another royal declaration. Instead, he stood, returned the journal to me, and left the archive without asking for an answer. That should have been the end of it. It was not. The next morning, the palace bells did not ring outside my window at sunrise. Adrian had canceled the ceremonial wake-up because I had once called it an attack on human dignity. At breakfast, the kitchen served strong coffee, buttered toast, and eggs instead of the 12 decorative dishes no one actually ate. By noon, 3 shelves of books arrived at the West residence with a note in Adrian's precise handwriting. For the hours when sleep refuses to cooperate. He also moved council meetings away from my rooms, ordered the staff to take regular breaks, and told the royal tailor that my formal coats should weigh less than a small horse. None of it came with demands. That was the troubling part. Adrian did not ask me to praise him. He did not mention the marriage. He simply noticed things and changed them. A week later, snow covered the palace gardens in white, softening every hedge and stone path. I found him outside my residence, sitting on the steps with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Are kings allowed to sit on frozen stairs? I asked. Only reckless ones. That explains the crown. He handed me a cup. Warmth spread through my gloves. For a while, we watched snow settle over the sleeping roses. I have been thinking about what you said, Adrian began. That care is not a debt. Dangerous hobby. Thinking. I am trying to improve. I looked at him. Snow had gathered in his dark hair, and without the crown, he seemed younger, less untouchable. Are you doing all of this for Ethan? I asked. Adrian understood which Ethan I meant. His gaze dropped to his cup. I regret what I did to him. I will regret it for the rest of my life. The answer hurt more than I expected. Then he turned toward me. But I am not asking him to stay. My breath caught. The man I wait for outside this house is you. The man whose terrible jokes I remember during council is you. The man I want beside me is you. The distance between us became very small. Adrian lifted one hand, then stopped before touching my face. He waited. That single pause affected me more than any grand speech could have. I leaned forward, almost closing the space between us. Then fear rose inside me like cold water. I moved back. Adrian lowered his hand immediately. No anger. No pressure. He only placed his coat around my shoulders. You do not owe me an answer, he said. Before I could reply, Lucas hurried across the garden, breathless and pale. Your Majesty, Your Grace, the Royal Council has assembled without permission. Adrian stood. Why? Lucas looked directly at me. Chancellor Hale claims the real royal husband is dead. He says an unknown spirit has taken his body, and he intends to prove it before the entire kingdom. The council chamber had been transformed before we arrived. Black candles formed a circle across the marble floor, and a sheet of pale blue light shimmered in the air like a doorway made from winter sky. Marcus stood beside it in ceremonial robes, surrounded by frightened nobles who clearly regretted attending whatever this was. There he is, Marcus announced, pointing at me. The stranger wearing a dead man's face. Every person in the chamber turned toward us. Adrian stepped in front of me without hesitation. You will address him as your royal consort. Marcus smiled. Even after he admits that he is not Ethan Carter? My mouth went dry. This was not exactly how I had planned to reveal my interdimensional identity. I had imagined fewer witnesses and considerably more coffee. He is correct, I said. Shock moved through the room in a wave of whispers. Adrian looked back at me, but his expression did not change. He already knew the truth that mattered. Marcus gestured toward the glowing doorway. The ancient rite will return this spirit to the world from which he came. The kingdom will be cleansed, and the crown will be safe. The light shifted, and for one impossible moment, I saw my old apartment on the other side. My desk, my coffee mug, morning traffic beyond the window. It was ordinary, familiar, and lonely enough to make my chest ache. You can go home, Marcus said softly. You only need the king's blood to open the passage fully. Adrian moved closer to me. Do not listen to him. Marcus raised his voice for the council. Then choose, your majesty. Surrender the throne, or surrender the creature who deceived you. The chamber became silent. Adrian reached for his crown. Every noble seemed to stop breathing. He removed it, held it for one long second, then placed it on the floor between us. A kingdom can choose another king, he said. His hand found mine, warm and steady. I will not find him twice. Something inside me broke open, not painfully, but like a locked window finally allowing in air. Marcus stared at the crown. You would abandon everything for an imposter? No, Adrian answered. I would abandon power for the man I love. I squeezed his hand, then faced the council. Marcus is hoping everyone will be too distracted by magic to ask why he knows how this ritual works. Lucas stepped forward carrying the journal, pharmacy records, and the burned letter marked with Marcus's seal. One by one, he read the evidence aloud. The altered medicine orders. The hidden payments. The threats against the original Ethan. Marcus tried to interrupt, but the nobles had finally begun asking the right questions. The glowing doorway flickered as his control slipped. You cannot prove any of this, he said. Oliver entered behind the royal physician, holding the missing ledger Marcus had hidden in the West residence. Actually, I said, we brought receipts. The portal collapsed into harmless sparks that floated toward the ceiling like blue fireflies. Guards escorted Marcus from the chamber without struggle, while the council stood in stunned silence. I looked down at Adrian's crown resting on the marble. You should probably pick that up. Only if you were staying. My old apartment had vanished. The choice remained. I bent, lifted the crown, and placed it back in his hands. I am staying, I said. But we are renegotiating the mourning bells. Adrian smiled, and this time he did not hide it. 3 weeks after Marcus was removed from office, Adrian stood before the royal council and did something no ruler in Asteria had done in living memory. He admitted that he had been wrong. He cleared Ethan Carter's name, released every hidden record, and ordered a memorial garden planted beside the West residence. He protected this kingdom when no one believed him, Adrian said, his voice steady even when his hands were not. His loyalty deserved gratitude, not suspicion. I watched from the back of the chamber, carrying the strange grief of a man whose memories lived inside me, but whose life I could never return. When the council ended, Adrian found me beneath the glass roof of the greenhouse. Winter sunlight rested across the sleeping roses, and the simple gold band I had once removed waited in his palm. Beside it was a folded document. This ends the marriage, he said. I looked up sharply. That is a bold strategy after asking me to stay. The marriage belonged to another man. It began through obligation and survived through misunderstanding. You deserve the freedom to choose what comes next. I opened the document. It granted me the West residence, a private income, and the right to leave the palace or the kingdom whenever I wished. There were no hidden conditions, no royal commands, just an open door. My chest tightened. You would really let me go? Adrian's eyes met mine. I would hate every mile between us, but yes. Apparently, nothing was more dangerous than a powerful man learning emotional maturity. I signed the document. Adrian's face remained composed, but his fingers closed around the old ring. I understand, he said quietly. No, you do not. I reached into my coat and placed a small silver ring on the table between us. It was plain, slightly uneven, and made from metal Oliver had found in the abandoned garden shed. The first marriage is over, I said. This time, you can ask properly. Adrian stared at the ring, then at me. The king who could silence an entire room with one look suddenly seemed unable to form a sentence. It was deeply satisfying. Finally, he lowered himself to one knee. Ethan Carter, will you stay beside me, not because the crown requires it, but because you choose me? I have conditions. Relief flickered across his face. Of course you do. No bells before 8 in the morning. No formal dinners longer than 2 hours. The staff gets 1 full day off every week. And you stop pretending coffee is a moral failure. Agreed. Then yes. Adrian slipped the silver ring onto my finger and pressed a gentle kiss to my forehead. Months later, the council waited outside his private study while I slept with my head resting on his lap. Lucas knocked once and announced that the ministers were becoming impatient. Adrian looked down at me, then returned to the book in his hand. Move the meeting to noon. I opened one eye. Are you delaying the government because I am sleeping? I am protecting the kingdom from your mood when you are awakened too early. Smart man. He smiled and brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead. I had spent my first life believing rest had to be earned and affection had to be repaid. In this life, I never learned how to please a king. I only taught one that love was not a performance. It was a quiet room, an open choice, and someone who stayed without asking you to become exhausted, proving that you deserve them.